Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cover with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So, in tune with a kind of a question or comment that leads us into our subject, what we call life is not smooth. I think everybody will acknowledge that. Then we have to ask, what do we mean by life? And why should it be smooth? And why should we expect it to be smooth? We would want it to be smooth, but it's not like that. How do we cope with it? What is the formula we can use? And we come to the conclusion, of course, that understanding your spiritual nature is where we start. But very often that's where we finish. And what I mean by that is, we wait for some painful moment in life that pinches us a little harder than most, that stimulates us to look in different places and to shift our way of thinking and to shift our approach to life and our definition of life. So the questioner talks about the spiritual life and so on and so forth, and real life. How do we cope with real life? And of course, Vedanta immediately will take that apart and say, what do you mean by reality? Because we have it switched around. Bhagavad Gita tells us that what is night to most of us is day to the yogi, what is day is night, and so on. It's all the opposites. It's a completely different way of looking at things. And we are so used to looking at things in a conventional way. What do we mean conventional way? It means within the confines of our parameters. And that is why we have to keep studying scripture. And by scripture, I mean inspiring books, Gospel of Ramakrishna, Life of Saints. But the principle behind the question, what is life, is really contained in the philosophy works. It's contained in the Upanishads, contained in the Bhagavad Gita, systematized in the Brahma Sutras. This is our Prasthanatraya, our standard literature upon which everything else is based. You can see that there's a kind of hub, and then there are kind of spokes from the hub, so that we should be able to tell the same thing in different ways to suit different tastes, temperaments, and people. That is why we have so much literature, so that we have the wide scope, a wide range to approach the subject from many different points of view, using maybe analogies, using maybe parable stories, and so on. And so you'll know by now that there's a book I recommend by Florence Scovel Shinn called The Game of Life and How to Play It. But it raises a question. Who said life was a game? It doesn't seem like that. Occasionally it may look like that when things are running smoothly, but when things are not running smoothly, it looks like a struggle. And so it's worth just reading the opening paragraphs of Florence's book, The Game of Life and How to Play It. And every sentence she makes and every paragraph that she writes is really most profound. Now, it's based on Vedanta. There's no question about it. And it's just couched in Christian language. And since most people here who listen have a Christian background of some kind, it's highly appropriate, but we can use alternative language as well. So she starts off with the game. Most people consider life a battle, but it's not a battle, it's a game. We need to have a conviction about that. So when we look at so-called life, life meaning our waking state where we are confronted by people of different types with different temperaments, giving us the opportunity to react in different ways, places, environments, and events that happen before our very eyes. Now, as you know, in Vedanta, we summarize that as a waking state because we acknowledge if we are to take the totality of our experience, there are three segments to it, three worlds that all of us experience. So we might say there's a tripartite world, and which consists of waking, and then we drift off into a dream, and dream is sleep. And you may say that's all very well, but our reality is the waking world. That's how we register it. But it's worth considering all the others as well, and that is why there are philosophical approaches that do it. The Upanishads are loaded with that. Katha Upanishad is loaded with it. The only exception is Bhagavad Gita doesn't mention these three states of consciousness. But every other, more or less, most of the Upanishads will say it, the Persian Upanishad will say it. And of course, there's one Upanishad which is dedicated to the subject. Why would we bother if it's not relevant in a practical way? So most people consider life a battle where I put myself on the one side, and on the opposite side, things are generally not in my favor, and I have to struggle. And I create a formula, and we know from the Enneagram, and for those who we're broadcasting to, you may not understand these terms, but just to let you know that there are different personality types based on two factors. One we call guna, the one we call karma, and it's another way of saying nature and nurture, or nurture and nature. So the nature means guna, our previous experience about it. Guna has other meanings too, but that's what we mean in the context, and we find this in the Bhagavad Gita. So it is something, some tendency that comes from our previous experience, and we'll explore a little bit of that as we go on. But the second thing, and there's nothing we can do about that, by the way, the arrow is shot from the bow, and that's gone, and arrives as what we call prarabdha karma. Nothing we can do about it. But the other side, we can do something about it. That is the other approximately 50%, which comes under the heading of nurture. In other words, a response to unfair demands where we are, in my example, 1 foot when everybody else is 6 foot high, and we have to adapt some kind of strategy to keep going, living up to the demands and expectations of those much bigger than ourselves, and we have no way of measuring what is appropriate. We simply take in as a script all the information that comes from the parental body, or those who played that role, unedited. And then we have to work out our responses as children, and they are primarily from an emotional point of view. And the emotional point of view is very much dominated by negativity. That all gets replayed in our adulthood. And as I say, the only difference between play, if you like, as a child with toys and so on, toys and dolls and toy soldiers and what have you, is that in adulthood we play with small objects like small balls, or we tear each other apart on a field and somehow seem to enjoy it. Those who follow rugby will know that I'm a keen follower of rugby, and we're into the Six Nations at the moment. And so it's a strange game. It's a tribal game, you may say, where two teams decide that they will do battle against each other, tear each other to pieces, sometimes be very unpleasant, definitely always be aggressive, that's the name of the game, but introduce a level of skill about it. And at the end of the day, they all shake hands, appreciate each other's efforts. They've all been through tough training, and they all know how difficult it is on the battlefield, but they all enjoy it thoroughly. And they go and maybe socialize afterwards. Somebody visiting from Mars might view this and think that's very strange behavior. Report back, you see what these people do. And they have a huge and extensive field. And the field has a number of different obstacles in it. And in the distance, there's a flag. And the flag tells a person where a very small diameter hole is. And you're given a stick and you hit this ball, poor thing, and drive it far away and try and get it into this little hole. And nobody really from Mars knows why. So we have this requirement to replay a sense of a pleasure, and pleasure is always mental. We think pleasure is physical, but physical is only the means to express our need for internal mental pleasure. That is why in the Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, we find a whole profile of regression. It starts off with brooding. And so you may wonder what that is. It's not just looking, it starts off in the mind. And from that movement comes attachment to an object. And don't forget the object, two types are there, external and internal. But from that comes desire. And when we nurture desire, we often get frustrated because no desire can be fully fulfilled. And that arises in krodha, or anger. Anger meaning mild frustration to outburst. And that creates difficulty for us. And so we can narrow down a cause of our dissatisfaction, and it is desire, fear, anger. These are the three kind of aspects of the degradation, mental degradation that occurs for us. Naturally, in order to get a grip on that and make ourselves happier, there is only one thing that we can do, and that is we have to shift our thinking and find a different way of viewing it. In other words, a different way of interpreting life. Now, I was reading this from my Kindle, which has very kindly gone off. That's one of the vicissitudes of life. Yeah. So, is it a battle or is it a play? It depends on how we view it. It depends on our mental frame, on our interpretation of what is life. Now, if we really want to analyze this question, what is life? I remind you that the whole of what we call life or nature has three components. And it's very, very important to understand the significance of these three components. These are called gunas, these are binding forces. And they're integral to the expression, to what we see and experience on the outside, and also on the inside, all the mental states as well. But more than that, these gunas are binding elements, and they are components of nature, and there are some alternative terms to nature. Life is a term, nature is a term. But another term for it really is Maya. And what does Maya mean? Well, originally the term meant a kind of magic, something that deceives us. And it's inscrutable. Many people interpret it as illusion. But it's not exactly illusion. Or if it is, it's a very real illusion. Even Einstein was said to have written, time is an illusion, but a very real one. So we are faced with this combination, these three kinds of qualities which are there. And these are binding elements. If we're not careful, we'll get caught up with them, and most people do. So let me try and get back this Game of Life as a book. I'm reading from a Kindle, and the Kindle has very nicely gone off. Now, one thing about this experience I'm having in the moment is the irregularity of life, and that is its lack of smoothness. So most people, according to Florence Scoven Schilling, just to repeat it here, consider life a battle, but it's not a battle, it's a game. Now, why would we even say it's a game? Why would we make that declaration? It's because how do we answer some serious questions? There are religions that have theologies with dilemmas in them. The one dilemma is the problem of evil, as it's called, or suffering, pain, disturbance, difficulties. How do we explain that? Given that there must be a God, an original entity that has a creative function, and in that creative function would naturally want to make a good world, the best of possible worlds. Why would such a God create any form of suffering? And so involved in this, we have to understand a concept of karma. And that is a kind of game. It's a game of what is called sowing and reaping, or giving and receiving. And Florence Scoven mentions this. She says, it's a game, however, which cannot be played successfully without the knowledge of spiritual law. And she says, the scriptures, they give the rules of the game with wonderful clarity. She mentions that Jesus taught that it was a great game of giving and receiving. And she puts a quotation there. Whatsoever a person soweth, that shall he also reap. And this means that whatever man sends out in word or deed will return to him. What he gives, he will receive. Now, it's worth noting that when a person does some action, a deed, it is preceded by a word. And word and thought goes together. If you examine the train of your thought, you'll see it is a conversation with yourself. And you can drag the mind down with it or elevate the mind up with it. There are two kinds of patterns. One is a spiral pattern. That's what we call life. And sometimes it spirals down and sometimes it spirals up. And so we are all open to moods where a spiral down can happen and a spiral up can happen. And this up and down movement is really what we call life. But we're not really getting anywhere. We're simply going up and down. Like being on a fun fair or a Ferris wheel, you go up, you go down. But nothing else is happening. You wouldn't want to be on the Ferris wheel for 1,000 years. So this pattern is there, and how to get out of it. There has to be a different way of thinking, a shifting. And the shifting is in true positivity that is associated with totality, not something limited. It goes over and beyond positivity. We hear much about positive thinking. And what is the definition? People desperately trying to be positive and never succeeding. Well, that's not really very positive then, is it? So where do we get this tremendous super positivity that we have access to? And it is just to get down into our true nature from the start. The Bhagavad Gita is very helpful in this, because it immediately tells us in distress, a condition, for example, like Arjun's, a good psychologist will know there's something that has to be done forcefully. And so Arjun, in a difficult situation, is making many, many different kinds of excuses for escaping the so-called reality. And where does he find himself? Well, he thinks he finds himself in the company of a sympathizer, somebody who says, yes, moving away from the problem, put it that way, is a good solution. You're correct. You're right. Please carry on. Instead of that, Krishna accuses Arjuna, and therefore all of us, of cowardice. Running away from the problem doesn't help it, because nature's university, as it were, is designed that if you run away from something, you'll have to face it in another environment. You can't escape it. So Florence Scovel-Shinn carries on, whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. This means that whatever a person sends out in word or deed will return to him. What he gives, he will receive. This is an immutable law. And what we give in terms of thought is virtually every second. She goes on, if he hates, he will receive hate. If he gives love, he will receive love. If he gives criticism, he will receive criticism. If he lies, he will be lied to. If he cheats, he will be cheated. And we are taught also that the imaging faculty plays a leading part in the game of life. That is so significant. We think in words, and words means concepts, pictures. We're watching the movies internally all the time. And so we have to change what we are watching, change the movie. And we have a choice in doing that. Just as if you want, for entertainment purposes, to watch a movie, you have the choice. And you have the choice to watch a tragedy, in which case your mood will change for at least a few hours. You'll be spiraling downwards. Or we have the chance to catch maybe a comedy that might elevate our mood upwards. Image making, that is, using the faculty of our imagination, using words and concepts, constructing the very, very best that we are capable of doing. Proverbs is being quoted, keep thy heart or imagination with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. And this means that what a person images sooner or later externalizes in his affairs. She goes on to give an example. So we see, to play successfully the game of life, we must train the imaging faculty. Now this, in yogic language, is translated as verbal delusion, is what Patanjali calls it, with a translated version of it. It's one of 5 kinds of waves in the mental field, in the mind. The idea is the mind stuff is chitta, like a lake, with waves operating in it, and 5 types of waves are there. And if you remember, there are right knowledge, there are wrong knowledge. Verbal delusion is there, and sleep and memory. Now, what is this verbal delusion? It's imagining something which is not really there. And the whole of what we call the reality of life is an imagined thing where the reality is hidden. And when I say the reality, I mean the fundamental reality. And what we see and react to, our world, our life, is projected. And the third component, namely sattva, comes and sheds light in illumination on the reality. What is that reality? Atman, the divine self, the area that provides us with infinite possibilities. That's much more than positive thinking. It's not spiraling down, it's not spiraling up, it's going out of the whole situation completely. It's a complete, total shift of attitudes. A person with an imaging faculty she says, trained to image only good, brings into his life every righteous desire of his heart: health, wealth, love, friends, perfect self-expression, highest ideals. There are some traditions, some paradigms that, for example, um, the Middle Age sect that came in that was persecuted in northern Spain and southern France, the Cathars, they were called. They had this idea that the world was bad. They were a version of Gnostics. They said, the life and world is bad. It's sinful, and we have to get out of it. We have to somehow withdraw from it. We have to renounce it. But of course, when we talk about renunciation, we're not talking about getting out of life. We're saying, let us shift our attitudes and interpret life in a very different way so that we squeeze the orange juice of life to its maximum in great enjoyment. And that summarized is what we call lila. So that we can see in Ramakrishna's language two sides of the same coin. One is the eternal, the nitya, but the other side of it is the lila, and they are simply two aspects of one reality. There is no such thing as nature and God. There is no such thing as gold and the ring. There is no such thing as clay and the pot. So the pot, when you bring it down to its essence, is clay. It can be clay in many different forms. It always was clay. It is clay now. It will always be clay. The gold is gold. It can be transformed into a ring, into a bracelet, into a necklace, into many different ornaments. It can be even poured out in a consolidated way as a bar. But gold is gold. And it doesn't matter when its form changes. It's still gold. And this same way, we have to understand we ourselves are gold, precious, in a positive way, not a negative way. I once told an audience, I asking them a question, and they hesitated to commit themselves one way or the other. And I said, you're pure gold, yellow to the core. And this is what Arjuna is being accused of in the Bhagavad Gita. So Krishna tells him straight about his own internal glory, that, by the way, things are transient. States of consciousness come and go. This world comes and goes. Just as on a sports field, the sport has a beginning, it has a middle section where the play occurs, and at the end of so many minutes, the whistle blows and the game is over. That doesn't mean to say another game is not being prepared for the next weekend. It is. The imagination has been called the scissors of the mind, and it is ever cutting day by day the pictures that man sees there, and sooner or later he meets his own creations in his outer world. To train the imagination successfully, man must understand the workings of his mind. The Greeks therefore say, know thyself. Now, we get so much bogged down in various so-called difficulties that we interpret our response as struggles instead of reissuing it as games. And the game is the only explanation we have. The concept of Lila is the only explanation we have for the world as it is, thereby removing any difficulty about the so-called problem of evil. Problem of evil is dealt with this different outlook, number one, but secondly, it is dealt with by giving us an explanation as to why there is apparent inequality in the world. If you ask one of my Muslim friends, for example, why did Allah, because you say it's his will, make a small child suffer? And the answer was, oh, all suffering is man-made. No, not in this case. There are some children, of course, who are victims of man-made wars, no doubt. And when we talk about the cause of difficulties and where we want protection, where we chant Shanti, 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 peace, peace 3 times, the first time really is that we want some kind of peace that is an antidote to the disturbance we make by our own actions and thoughts. But secondly, we are subject to other people's actions. And thirdly, we are subject to the vicissitudes, the ups and downs, which are intrinsic in nature. And they have to be like that. Because nature, the word for it in Sanskrit is prakriti. It means something that is uneven, something that is rough, not something that is smooth, something that is not refined. Sanskrit, on the other hand, is refined. So we don't expect nature in any way to be smooth, to be perfect. It's a dynamic thing. And for it to be dynamic, various forces have to be there in order to create an equilibrium or an apparent equilibrium, the status quo. This force we call prana. And in one question, the Prashna Upanishad, the question of this prana comes up. How is it that we have all these different kinds of energy? No, it comes from one energy. And then what is the source of that energy? It comes from God. That word for God, cosmic mind. There is a cosmic mind from which all these things come. A personal deity, some entity that provides us with intelligence, that is the epitome of consciousness itself. And so that is what we worship, and we are told, for example, in the Bhagavatam, that worship of that yields its result, will yield our freedom. It will act as sattva to clarify the waves and calm down, neutralize these disturbances, which are the disturbances, well, some are positive, some are negative, but verbal delusion, this imagination, is intrinsically negative. We jump to a conclusion. Two people talking in a corner, you come into a room and immediately you assume, you're talking about me, are you not? And then you can approach them, well, why are you talking behind my back? And they're saying, actually, we were talking about the cyclonic weather in South America currently occurring now. And so we get completely what we call the wrong end of the stick. Whatever man feels deeply or images clearly is impressed upon the subconscious mind and carried out in minutest detail. We call the samskaras. There are 3 departments of the mind even before that, she says. The subconscious, the conscious, and the superconscious. Exactly Swami Vivekananda's language. If you read his commentaries on the Raja Yoga, he puts it exactly in these terms. The subconscious is simply power without direction. It's like steam or electricity, and it does what it's directed to do. It has no power of induction. For example, and he gives an example, a woman I know, when a child, always made believe she was a widow. She dressed up in black clothes and wore a long black veil, and people thought she was very clever and amusing. She grew up and married a man with whom she was deeply in love. In a short time he died, and she wore black and a sweeping veil for many years. The picture of herself as a widow was impressed upon the subconscious mind, and in due time worked itself out regardless of the havoc created. The conscious mind has been called mortal or carnal mind. It's the human mind and sees life as it appears to be. It sees death, disaster, sickness, poverty, and limitation of every kind, and it impresses the subconscious. The superconscious mind is the God mind within each man and is the realm of perfect ideas. In it is the perfect pattern spoken of by Plato, the divine design, for there is a divine design for each person. I'll just step back a little bit and make some commentary on that. So we are responsible for our samskaras, and this level of the subconscious mind has a pulling power. It attracts things toward itself. The overall condition of it is what draws things in. It has this pulling power and condenses all of these thoughts entrenched as our so-called reality. So in a sense, when you talk about reality, you're talking of a self-created environment, and therefore you can change it. You can make a much better environment. The mechanics of this thinking process is entrenched in the design that nature has, where the cosmic mind is mobilized, and that cosmic mind delivers or manifests its glory as a combination of the elements, and it comes across the border, as it were, in the world, in the particulate world, because prior to that it was all kind of wave systems. There is a place that you are to fulfill, and no one else can fill, something you are to do which no one else can do. This is a perfect picture of this in the superconscious mind, and usually flashes across the conscious as an unattainable ideal, something too good to be true. Having explained that life is a game, she now goes on to this important subject of sowing and reaping, or giving and receiving, as she calls it. And that is where this karma comes in. We have to act. We can't avoid action. The whole of the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita deals with this question of action as yajna. So how to play the game, a part of playing it, is to transfer action, mere activity, including thought, word, and deed, into something that is useful to us, something that balances the mind, something that gives us access to our own inner freedom. And when we do that, it is now called karma yoga. Maya is what we call this combination of the three gunas. Tribhir gunamaye bhavaye, deluded by these threefold dispositions of nature. The gunas, the binding elements. This world does not know me, that is the actual underlying reality, who am above them and also immutable. Then he says, Daivi hyasya gunamayi mama maya duratyaya. Truly, this divine maya, mysterious power, this divine mysterious power of mine, alternatively called prana, energy, also called Shakti, according to the Tantrics, also called prana, according to the yogis, also called this Maya, according to the Vedantins, otherwise called nature, this whole universe, in other words, with its combinations, reduced to one thing, energy. That's all we find. But this energy is coming from a cosmic mind. Truly, this divine Maya, or mysterious power of mind, says Krishna, made up of these three components, these evolutionary forces called gunas, is hard to overcome. But those who take refuge in me alone cross over this illusion. First of all, we register it is something that is like an illusion. It looks like something, but it's not that. Furthermore, there's this apparitional aspect that we call the universe is simply projected by the Lord himself from himself. The Bhagavatam, 11th chapter of it, the last message of Krishna comes out separately, says, Krishna says, I'm playing this game, this Maya, on myself because I'm the only entity which is there, we may add. But no doubt it's hard to overcome because we see it as it is and interpret it as it is, and we don't move on from there. Having moved on from there with the help of scripture, with the help of teacher, with the help of practice mainly, we can take refuge in that dispenser of it, in me alone, in the personal deity, in your Ishtadevata, in your most beloved, and you can cross this illusion. Supposing we don't do that, supposing we dig our heels in, supposing we're stuck in our misunderstanding and misinterpretation of the universe, we can call this Namam Duskritino Mutaha, the evildoers, the deluded, lowest of humanity, deprived really of this discrimination by Maya and following the ways of the Asuras. They don't worship me. Now you may say, well, that's not me. I'm not an Asura. I'm not a demon. But we are occasionally. I had said to somebody, a devout religious person, I said, but actually from time to time, are we not all atheists? If you were truly a theist, there would be no such thing as sin, evil, error, mistake, weakness, or misery. You would be bathing in the divine glory continuously with great faith. You would never forget this for a moment. And so this worship is necessary and is advocated, bearing in mind that 4 types of people would worship. And Krishna goes on to describe what these 4 types of virtuous people are. That is, those who are in distress, those who are looking for increased knowledge, those who are looking for more abundance, for wealth, for increase in lifestyle. But the 4th type, of course, is the wise person, because they're ever steadfast and devoted to the One. And the prerequisite to that would be a yearning heart. And if we don't have it, we have to pray for it. Grant me a yearning heart. I think I can safely say, the person is not here, that their spiritual practice shifted somewhat. A few weeks ago, I went to their house. I knew that they weren't really practicing what had been taught them properly, and they were putting it down to, I can't find a shrine. Well, actually, once we had established that you can do certain things in a different way, the whole thing opened up for them. And the feedback that I got from them today gave a completely different depth of experience. So Krishna tells us, this one that is lording over everything, that is this life principle, this original creative entity that manifests from itself, is one. It's undifferentiated and has powers, its powers, such as the organs of speech and so on and so forth, differentiated by time, and appears to be of diverse forms. We don't think of it like that normally. We see things in such individual, separate ways. We don't see the overall totality. When we see the overall totality, we see the one thing in different forms. There is a universe. Even though it's popular to say there's a multiverse, actually, only one thing is there. Even if you have 100 versions of it, there's still only one thing. So, he is the primeval one. These diverse forms, like seeds reaching their proper fields, for he is the primeval one, the substratum of Maya, the substratum of this appearance, the component of the 3 gunas, and the cause of the cosmic lotus. Cosmic lotus means the universe that we can, in our imagination, think of as a lotus. It's a wonderful clue to a certain type of meditation. We can think of the whole universe as a huge, colossal, cosmic lotus that opens up from a seed form, opens up and expands, there's no need to think of it in purely scientific terms or purely secular physical terms. There is a trend, and has been for a number of years, for science who are trying to explore the nature of the universe. And there is this tendency for them to put everything as in a quantitative way and avoid what we call qualia, personal experience. When we include this and the universe of physicality, we have what one philosopher is calling the corporeal world. This is the whole world of the waking state. And an intermediate state is there, but the whole corporeal world will include the subtle things, will include the subtle elements which are there, operating as waves. And we experience them as joy. We experience them as disappointment, or despondency, or happiness, or love. These are not quantitative things. You can't fill a jar of disappointment. You can't offer somebody a bucket of peace or a jar of love or joy. So, on whom this entity, as its warp and woof, this entire universe rests as a cloth on the network of threads. And this tree, what we call of samsara, the samsara, the words mean both the universe and the transmigration. We'll come on to that shortly. See, one of the persuasive arguments that Krishna gives to Arjuna is, even if you don't admit the existence of a non-born, non-dying entity, which is your own divine self, even if you don't admit this, purely from a material point of view, this is a body and it's like a worn garment. You can cast it off and you put a new one on. And you do that continuously. There's nothing to fear in this whole wheel of birth, life, and death. This game of life should be enjoyed, therefore, if you take it as a game. It requires a let-go attitude. It requires a playful attitude. It requires the observation to see the beauty, joy, and dynamic aspect of the whole of life, dancing, if you will. We are shortly on the 26th going to celebrate the night of Shiva, Shivaratri. And there one aspect of Shiva would be this Nataraja, this dancing entity. So profound, so simple and yet so profound in its significance, that this whole universe is something like a dancing exhibition, something like a dancing performance. In which case, what is the Lord? The Lord is the dancer. And we don't find the action, the dynamic energy of it, or the physicality of it in any way different from the dancer. When the dancer doesn't dance, we cannot call him dancer. But when the dancer dances, we call it a dance. We call it a dancer. And the universe is dancing. You must have noticed. But if we don't interpret it in this way, we have lost an opportunity to reframe what is here in front of us, and therefore engage with a sense of delight. Now you may say, but many things are going on in my life and many things are going on in the world, and it doesn't feel like a mere play. It doesn't feel like a dance. It doesn't feel like a joy. And that is because we don't take these three states of consciousness seriously. And if we did, we would see a play of waves. And we would also not complain if we registered that the cause of all our difficulties probably, largely, is ourselves. We may not register the exact causal moment that this happened, but even as we're born, we are carrying over our baggage from previous lives. Fortunately, we're all born as humans. That's a rare privilege and gives us the rare opportunity to reframe life as a game and to play the game. And if the life is a game, we should play it well. And by playing it well, we are actually doing karma yoga. We're playing to the maximum efficiency that we have with an equilibrium of mind, and we are inserting joy into it. Now, if you're not enjoying it, the chances are your mind is pitched to the future or the past and is not tuned into this present joyful moment. Whenever we have these workshops and what have you, I try to take people on a walk. I try to get people to implement this oaths, this observe carefully, the things that you took for granted in particular, and then make sure that your observation will spontaneously be felt and observed as an appreciation, even a love, and that can well up as a sense of thankfulness. And that system overall is called worship. Every single moment of the day is an opportunity for us to worship. And by worship, I mean getting out of the spiral completely, up and down, and seeing an extra value, an extra dimension in it. Seeing it with a sense of imagination. Seeing it as it is ideally, as it is in its pristine aspect, in its unfolding aspect, in its dynamic aspect, in its spiritual aspect, rather than looking purely at the surface and responding as people typically do. One thing I would recommend, and that is if you have the book, Game of Life and How to Play It. See, it's only a thin book, very small book. You can get it, if those who have it already. You can revisit it nicely and see how practical it is and yet how profound it is. Don't forget, it is based on spiritual law. It is not based on psychological law. It's not based on physical law. It's based on spiritual law. That is, getting out, as it were, from the ascending, descending spirals of life and going into the area, so to speak, of infinite possibilities. What is here described as the superconscious. Getting out of the conscious, getting out of the subconscious, and steering our attention to the superconsciousness. And we do this by love of God, primarily. We do this by love of work for work's sake, not for any reward, not to get any result, not to have any future orientation about it, but simply tuning into the present moment with a sense of glory, making the Lord of the universe your playmate, your companion on your journey, and enjoy life to the fullest. Well, I think that's all we really have at the moment. So, thanks. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Thank you, Swamiji.
All good.
Thank you, Swami.